Good morning friends and welcome back to NPTEL online certification course on public speaking. My dear friends, in the previous lecture we completed the forms and stages of public speaking, and by now most of you might have realized that public speaking is varied, vital and vibrant. And to achieve excellence in public speaking, one has to get exposed to different situations, and no one can become a perfect speaker just in a day or in a month. Actually, you require several opportunities where you can get the chance to speak, fine, and you are going to fulfill your own need of becoming a good public speaker with these practices day by day. Apart from our home, the second best platform to get exposed to public speaking is one's alma mater or one's educational institute. In this lecture, we are going to talk about, and I have also titled this lecture as classroom interaction. Most of you might be thinking that is classroom interaction also helpful in public speaking? Actually, while this classroom interaction, as all interactions are two-way and communicative, classroom interactions are going to be more helpful to teachers, but nonetheless even the speakers, I mean the future public speakers who are waiting or biding their time to speak, they also are going to be benefited by this lecture. Now, let us start the lecture and think and understand how classroom plays a vital role in making a speaker bold, brilliant, vivacious and confident. All of you may admit that classroom is not only about teaching, but it is also about learning. So, the teacher teaches no doubt, but the students learn more than what the teacher teaches. And that is why there should be a teacher-student as well as student-to-student communication. It is not that the teacher teaches and you simply learn from the teacher, rather the communication that you have with your peers, with other students, that also results in a fruitful communication, and that is also going to help you in attaining your growth and exposure, my dear friends. So, any alma mater for that matter is the first institution which is apart from home, and it plays a very significant role in shaping an individual's personality. And when I say personality, you might be reminded of the qualities that we discussed in the lecture on personality: mannerisms, the way of dressing, the way of speaking, realizing your own goals, duties, being ethical, fine. There are so many qualities that we have already discussed in the lecture on personality. Now, you might be thinking that if classroom interaction is going to be so helpful, what actually are the advantages and what are the qualities that one can learn from classroom interaction? There are several components of classroom teaching and learning, because it is not only about teaching, as I said, it is also about learning. Now, the very first thing that as an audience member one can learn is the language that is used by the teacher. Of course, the language is formal, and all the speeches and presentations that you are going to perform in the days to come, they are also going to be formal. So, you can relate the language used by your teacher in the classroom with the speeches or the presentation that you are going to make. So, what I mean when I say language? The choice of words, the choice of sentences, the choice of the length of sentences, and then it also can provide you the feedback. You might have at times found that when a teacher teaches in the classroom, he also poses some small questions and the students respond to it. Now, look at the question and look at the response. Sometimes many of us do not respond to, but do we not at times become very jealous, envious? Do we not at times start feeling a sort of low? Fine, of course. But then in a way you are inspired that next time you can also make it. And the learner's interaction with the teacher, the way the communication goes on between the teacher and the students, maybe at times even though it is formal, the sentences that are used, the choice of words which are preferred, so they actually help you in numerous ways. Actually, it is your classroom where as students you feel safe, and for teachers they also feel a lot of freedom, because the entire classroom belongs to him and he has got a control over the students. So, the teacher and the student, they fare a better space, fine, here in the classroom, and this space is safe, meaning thereby you have a liberty to speak. As a teacher, you also have the liberty to float your ideas and get heard, and you are also responded to. So, all these create a sort of motivation in the learners, and these motivations, of course, at times you might find that if a student is asked a question and it is not responded by one student, other students may respond, but then sometimes as teachers we become a little bit critical without realizing how it is going to impact or affect the students who are actually in a learning stage. So, we also should realize that even if there is going to be a criticism, the criticism has to be healthy, the criticism has to be beneficial. Isn't this classroom interaction going to be helpful for all our future speeches and presentations? Of course, they are going to be helpful. Now, as a teacher who is actually a public speaker here, who is actually training the future public speakers, there are certain challenges before him, and then he can also adopt certain changes. Now, since students are required to participate, as a teacher, we have to involve our students. If we think of public speaking as a two-way affair, then involvement is very essential, like all other communicative situations. So, students are required to participate actively in the classroom, unlike in olden times. Now, times have changed. In olden times, the teachers used to speak and the students simply used to listen. Even now in today's context, we can say that this could not have been a proper listening, rather it was actually a sort of imposition, fine. It was an imposition where the teacher simply had the right to speak, and when his time was over, the teacher would simply pack up his notes and go, leaving the students in a different sort of curiosity. But now things have changed. So, in earlier days, audience members, students as audience members used to be listeners only, and it becomes the job of teacher to make it possible. Many people who often say that in my class students do not listen. Now I often say that there is some fault, because as a teacher we do not want to involve them. As a speaker we do not want to accommodate them, which is actually very essential, my dear friends. Teachers are actually trained to avail learning experiences which can actually create, which can trigger in their students as audience a quest, a search for knowledge, and which can also raise their curiosity level, trigger imagination. Since I am a teacher of English, naturally when I teach a poem, I at times feel that when I create a picture out of words, the students might be imaging a sort of picture and might be correlating it with some of the past experiences, or might be thinking of another beautiful world. Of course, there are certain limitations when one is teaching a different subject. But then all subjects, all sorts of teaching, all sorts of these classroom interactions are going to be public speaking. Teachers are also allowed or required to allow students to set goals. We create in them not only a desire, this desire also may be that the students may in the days to come follow in the footsteps of the teachers, meaning thereby resulting in another set of public speakers, solve problems and make choices in terms of their learning. Now, since the advance of science and technology, what has effectuated or brought a change is change in our lifestyle, in our experiences, and students belonging to choice driven. Not everyone's choices are the same. It has actually become a consumer driven society, fine, the give and take, isn't it? Consumerism is actually on the peak, and this actually puts a lot of challenges before the teacher's knowledge and authority. Day by day, I mean every day you have to change your stand, every day you have to change your stance, every day you have to change your methodology of teaching, my dear friends. And those who are actually eager to join this teaching profession as a vocation, they are actually facing a very difficult time. However, they might have realized a lot from the last 2 years. The spell of pandemic for the last 2 years actually created a sort of dispassionate desire among even many new learners, many youngsters who wanted to take a profession like teaching. Now, it is time that we actually can realize on the views of Herbert, fine, Herbert's teaching theory. Herbert was a German philosopher, and he is considered to be the modern father of pedagogy, fine, meaning thereby teaching. And let us look at what Herbert's class teaching theory says. Now, there are 5 elements, and the 5 elements begin with preparation. Of course, in the present day world, when you talk about preparation, I think many of the teachers also may not agree, and different sorts of teaching require different sort of strategies of teaching. So, preparation is the best anecdote. Many people often say, what is there to prepare, because now we have everything ready made. Now we are actually having a flood of slides and you are slided off, my dear friends. But then will the teacher be substituted by this technology or the heavy influx of PPTs and all? No, the teacher will remain teacher. So, every effective teacher has his first step as preparation. Next to preparation comes the presentation. Whatever content has been tailored, the content has to be delivered. It has actually to be presented, and this presentation requires a lot of patience, and it also involves a lot of strategies. Association. Are you really able to associate yourself with your students who are actually multilingual, multicultural, coming from different sections of society? They have different sorts of exposure, different sorts of background. So, what a teacher does is, the teacher should not ideally make a sort of discrimination, rather he feels that all of them are equal, a sort of generalization, because the mode that I follow should suit everyone. And then ultimately comes the application. I mean the content that I created, how far it is going to be applicable to my students, that is very important. In this regard, we can also take another philosophy given by John Dewey. John Dewey's philosophy of education. Now, I mean every day or the other we are witnessing some change or the other. Now, John Dewey in his philosophy of education says, John Dewey is actually a 20th century philosopher. He propounded, in earlier times we had the teacher was actually a sage on the stage, fine, as if the teacher was not a teacher but a preacher, but then things have changed and our roles have also changed. Now from the teacher centered, there has been another pedagogical method which is child centered theory, which was actually given by John Dewey, and he emphasized democracy in education. And what he says is, since in a democratic society we think there is no external authority influence, it must use the voluntary disposition, voluntary, willful behavior and interest to replace it. Now we have to voluntarily participate, and the voluntary tendency and interest can only be formed through education. I mean, now there are no such bindings that what the teacher says is the only mantra, or the teacher is a sage or the preacher, as I said, but then we also have to leave room to the child, to the student as members, to the student as audience members. And Dewey's philosophy of education actually stresses on the importance of imagination. In earlier times when our teaching used to be only a one-sided affair, the children had little room for imagination, for creativity. But John Dewey says that the importance of imagination is very essential to drive thinking and learning forward, and for teachers to provide opportunities for students, the opportunities to be given to students to suspend judgment, engage in the playful consideration of possibilities and explore doubtful possibilities. Every day we find there is a talk of startups, and these startups are going to create a new world, and at times we also feel that, oh, this can also be possible. This is only because the way we have actually given opportunities and freedom to our students. Now in this regard, let us actually refer to one very important paper by Keking Chai, where he has mentioned how the principles and ways of classroom interaction, where he was talking about the classroom interaction in philosophy. And there he propounds or talks about 4 areas. What are they? Teacher centered stage, student centered stage, dual subject stage, and the stage of inter-subjectivity. We will briefly touch upon all these. Now the first is teacher centered stage. In a way, I already have said that earlier the teacher used to be a sage on the stage, fine, and Harvard's classroom pedagogy which actually emphasized, and in this way the teacher's desk was stationed right at the front of the classroom. See this space. So the teacher's space was right at the front of the classroom, and neat arrangement for rows of students, queues of students. I mean, there were several arrangements. The teacher was simply to speak and the student only used to be a listener. Teacher had a lot of power, knowledge, authority, and then students were in a different way. They were only the receivers at the receiving end. There was no freedom, my dear friend. There was no freedom at all. The next stage is student centered stage, where it is said the child centered theory, we have already spared some time on it. In the 20th century, the emphasis now changed from teachers to students and their growth in the classroom teaching. The role of the teacher naturally became less, it shrunk, and there was a shift. So according to Tao Xingzi, Dewey is one of Dewey's students, who says democracy and education is to teach people to be the master, to be their own masters, to be the masters of the country, to be the masters of the world. So freedom to students. However, teachers' potential in this regard was a little bit neglected, because the shift changed and teacher was no more a sage. The teacher actually was simply a sort of facilitator, and the teacher's potential or knowledge was not utilized because of the lopsidedness of the theory. Then came dual subject. By dual we mean both of them. Both of them had to play equally, fine. So, the ineffective teacher centered and student centered approaches, there was again an alteration or a change where teachers as well as students became the subject of education, and it actually retained the previous fallacy, the imbalance of power. So, when you gave both of them power, now where lies the control? So, it was very difficult, and the role of the teacher always asserted more authority over the students, even if they were given a little bit of space, and you wanted that there should be a dual space for them and democracy should be there, but then very little agency was left with students in this setup. And that is why we again moved to the next stage, and that is inter-subjectivity. Inter-subjectivity, this communication theory is dependent on its fundamental tenet in the 20th century, that is inter-subjectivity. Both the students and teachers have to reach a sort of understanding and agreement. They actually very mutually, they will be very mutually playing their part well, and there will be a coordination of social conformity to reach an understanding, the formation of non-forced consciousness, and they say it is a sort of democratic arrangement, a democratic communication both between the teacher and the students. There is no opposite end, but on the same side both teacher and students, both teacher and student, they are actually important. Now, what are the principles involved in it? Democracy, I mean both of them are equal, everyone is equal, equality and interaction. And in this process, in this theory, both listening and understanding go hand in hand. There is actually a dialogue. We have talked about the dialogue when both the participants, they speak to each other. So, there is a dialogue between the student as well as the teacher, and then they reach the consciousness as the goal. So, inter-subjectivity was given a lot of room in the classroom interaction. Now, let us also talk about a little bit about democracy, equality and interaction. Now, when we talk of democracy or democratic teaching, now in this regard both of them become the subjects, and the relationship between students and teachers becomes, according to Dewey, the relationship of inter-subjectivity. Inter-subjectivity. The basic principle that comprises in this category are equality and democracy. Teacher, now in this principle, the teacher cannot impose his or her views, rather the teacher will allow the students also to provide their views. Students cease to be the education customers, they are not only fine students, and they actually cease to be, they stop to be the education customers, which earlier was the rule that they are the customers. Now, in intersubjectivity both of them have to play their part, and we actually play it very democratically. In this regard there is a lot of listening and understanding. And what sort of listening and understanding? Mutual understanding, fine. Both of them, they actually have to listen to each other. It is not that only the teachers will speak and the students will listen. So, for equality and democracy, listening from both the sides becomes essential, and the relevance of listening during interaction cannot be written off. We have already discussed a lot in one of the lectures on listening. So, here we find that in this theory of teaching, there is a two-way communication. Both the teacher and student need to listen, and not only listen, my dear friend. What? Not only listen, rather they actually have to be empathetic. How can they be empathetic? We will also focus on this in the next lecture, but then here we should know that we should try to understand each other's needs, each other's patience, because you cannot continue speaking for a long time to the student, and nor the teachers would expect the students to speak in return for a long time. Students should not be absent-minded during this interaction, because throughout much depends on the two-way communication. Long-term effects, of course, are required to attain desired communication goals. Now, we have also talked about dialogue, and you know, the dialogue in drama, as we mentioned earlier, here also there is a dialogue between the student and the teacher. And in this dialogue, environment plays a major role. So, this dialogue plays a decisive role by the social environment when it comes to the process of teaching and learning. If whatever I say is not being heard, whatever I say is not being responded to, naturally it will not be a dialogue, it will simply be a monologue. How the information is being transmitted, that also has to have a sort of upper hand. Education mode has to be focused on teaching material and content. The material that the teacher brings or provides, that actually is more important. Democratic communication should exist between teacher and student through the medium of sincere dialogue. So, when we say democratic, there are certain things also to take into consideration, that the way language is used, it should not hurt anyone. We should actually be conscious of, or we should have a sort of sensitivity also, because our audience members or our listeners may be from different classes of society. We may have different sorts of gender also, different sorts of cultural faith also, and that also need to be taken into consideration. Now, one that we were discussing earlier as one of the components was to reach a sort of consensus as the goal. The end point or the goal has to be a sort of goal which is unanimous, which has got a sort of consensus, meaning thereby agreement of both the parties. Classroom interaction does not consist of uninterrupted dialogue and negotiation alone. It should not simply be uninterrupted. Even if the dialogue goes on, let it not continue for a long time. There needs to be some sort of pauses, some sort of breaks. It need not be uninterrupted dialogue and negotiation alone. It actually comprises interaction from both the ends. And the interaction has to unhinge itself, has to come from the narrowed fusion and register itself to the new horizon. Actually, what is of prime importance here is that teaching has to be participatory. Participatory from both the angles, from the angle of the teacher, from the angle of the student as well. That is very important, my dear friend. Now, we can also pair or some time on the ways of classroom interaction. What sort of interactions can be there? Quizzes between teacher student, student student. Now, see, this is also sort of interaction. When you have a quiz, the teacher can give a quiz to student, and there can be a quiz between the student and the student, and that will also generate a sort of communication. But then as a teacher or as a speaker, because the roles can change, so we have to see that we have our real eye on the need of learning, and then also see the emotional need of students. That is why you might be reminded of your olden golden days, when the moment you became silent or you kept mum, you were asked, I hope everything is right with you. Fine. So, the question is that with this interaction, this is also a form of interaction, you are actually trying to accommodate others, multiple rounds of dialogue on regular basis. Here one point of caution is that at times it so happens that as speakers, in the form of a public speaker, as a teacher, one only asks questions to those who respond, and the other people are actually left. Fine, but then this is not the right way. They feel neglected, they actually develop a low esteem, my dear friend. So, they should also be involved. If they are not able to answer, then as a speaker you must provide the answer. You have actually to be sensitive about the students' real life and future career goals. If sometimes or the other you come across such a situation as a speaker, next time you do a lot of research as to what lies behind, and then promote the participation of students in decision making. That is what we mean by democratic ways of teaching. My dear friends, you might have felt that in classroom interaction is one of the best ways through which many of our audience members who at present are our students, they actually get a sort of inspiration, they are actually ignited, they are activated, they are agitated, and next time you find they have answers to your queries and they participate wholeheartedly in this affair of teaching, in this affair of classroom interaction as a teaching. So, before we come to wind up this talk, let me take a quote by Malcolm X who says, education is actually the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. So, as a public speaker, which you are actually waiting for to become in the days to come, you have to practice, and the real practice, which of course initially starts at your home and later on it actually is catapulted in the school, and finally it is perfected when you emerge as a public speaker. I hope you will be able to derive some strength for all those weaknesses that you have felt, and these small speech acts or interactive sessions or interactive lessons will create in you a desire to be a better speaker in the days to come. With this, let me end this lecture and wait for the next lecture, where I shall, from interaction, we shall go to lectures and see how lectures also play a very significant role in transforming an audience member as a student into an effective public speaker. With this, thank you very much. I wish you all a good day ahead.